I entered the wrong hospital room. The Mafia boss stopped a terrified single mom from leaving. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jessica had no idea how she ended up here. She had just been rushing to find her son in the crowded hospital, trying to avoid the chaos of the emergency room. In her hurry, she found herself pushing open a door to what she thought was another waiting room. But as the door clicked shut behind her, she immediately realized she had made a mistake. This wasn't a waiting room at all. The room was far too quiet, too pristine. It smelled faintly of cologne, and the soft hum of air conditioning did little to break the tension in the air. The lights flickered softly above, and a tall man, dressed in an expensive dark suit, stood in the middle of the room, his back to her. Jessica froze. He hadn't turned around yet, but she could feel his presence looming. His movements were calculated, slow, as if he owned every inch of the space. He wasn't just any man. There was something about him that felt dangerous. She tried to step back quietly, but the moment her foot hit the floor with a soft thud, the man whipped around with lightning speed. His dark eyes locked onto hers, cold, calculating, and yet somehow familiar. "You're in the wrong place, sweetheart," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. Jessica's heart skipped a beat, panic rising within her. She took a step back, ready to leave, but he was already stepping toward her, his movements fluid and assured. He wasn't like anyone she had ever met. She could tell instantly that he wasn't someone who took kindly to mistakes, and judging by the way he looked at her, she knew she was making one by trying to leave. "I don't think you understand," he continued, his gaze narrowing slightly. "You're not leaving this room." The words hit Jessica harder than she expected. She had no idea who this man was, but something about his tone told her he wasn't someone who would let her walk away freely. She tried again to step back, but the door she had entered was now blocked by two men in black suits, silently watching her every move. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her palms sweating. She had no idea what was happening or why, but the terror was real. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just need to find my son. I didn't mean to intrude." He studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering on her face before his lips parted in a slow smile. "I'll let you leave," he said, but his voice was colder now. "But only if you stay with me for a while. You're not going anywhere until I say so." His words felt like a sentence, and Jessica couldn't help the wave of fear that crashed over her. Was this some kind of mistake? Had she just walked into a dangerous situation? Her mind raced, but before she could make another move, the man stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You don't get to walk out of here, not after what you've seen," he said softly. "But don't worry. I'll take care of you. Just stay with me." Jessica's heart was still racing, but there was something in his tone, a calmness mixed with an undeniable authority, that made her hesitate. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she wasn't sure what to do. She had no idea who this man was, or why he seemed to think she was part of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. All she knew was that she was trapped. The man smiled again, this time more confidently. "I'm Victor Moretti," he said, extending a hand to her, though it felt more like a command than an offer. "And you're mine now." Victor's eyes stayed locked on Jessica as he calmly took a step back, gesturing for her to follow him. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Jessica felt a tight knot form in her chest, but her feet remained frozen in place, unsure whether to move or stay. She had no idea what was happening, but every instinct in her told her this man was not someone to be crossed. His presence was overwhelming, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken rules. "Come with me," he said, his voice smooth, but there was no question in his tone. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. She had no choice but to follow. As she took a few steps, she noticed the two men who had been silently standing near the door now flanking her, their presence as intimidating as Victor's. The hall was dimly lit, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above adding to the eerie atmosphere. Jessica tried to calm herself, but the fear kept gnawing at her. She had to find a way out. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You'll find out soon enough, Victor replied, his tone still calm, as if the situation was completely under control. Jessica's heart raced. The fact that she didn't know what was happening made her panic even more. She had never been in a situation like this, and everything about Victor screamed danger. His well-fitted suit, his sharp features, the way people moved aside when he walked, it all screamed power. As they moved down the hall, she noticed that none of the hospital staff seemed to bat an eye. No one even acknowledged her presence, like she had become invisible in the world Victor inhabited. They stopped in front of a heavy, wooden door at the end of the hall. Victor paused, turning to her with a look that was both unreadable and intense. This is where you'll be staying for the time being, he said, opening the door with a casual motion. The room was nothing like the sterile, clinical spaces she had seen earlier. It was luxurious, with dark wood furniture, velvet curtains, and a king-sized bed in the center of the room. There was a heavy, old-fashioned chandelier overhead, casting a warm glow over the room's intricate decor. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. It was clear this was not just any ordinary room in a hospital. This was someone's private space. Victor stepped inside, turning back to her as she hesitated in the doorway. Sit down, he instructed, his voice low but firm. She didn't want to, but the authoritative tone in his voice made her feet move before she could think. She crossed the room, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. What was happening? Why was she here? Why was he doing this? As she sat down on the edge of the bed, Victor took a seat across from her, still watching her with that same calm, calculating gaze. You're safe here, he said, though his words didn't ease her anxiety. You don't have to worry about anything. I'm here to protect you. Jessica frowned. Protect her? From what? She was confused, more than ever. I don't understand, she whispered, trying to make sense of it all. You don't have to, Victor said, his eyes narrowing slightly. All you need to do is trust me. Stay here, and I'll take care of the rest. Jessica's mind was spinning. This was far beyond anything she could have imagined. She had walked into the wrong room, and now she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. But despite her confusion, there was something about Victor's presence, something about the way he spoke, that made her feel like she had no other choice but to stay. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Victor's lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained hard. Nothing for now. Just your cooperation. His smile faded as he added, and your silence. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Jessica could feel the tension building in her chest. This was far from over. Whatever game Victor was playing, she was now a part of it, and she had no idea what the rules were. But she had no choice. She was stuck here, at least for the time being, and the only thing she could do now was try to figure out how to navigate the world he was drawing her into. Victor watched Jessica closely, his gaze never wavering as she sat still on the edge of the bed. The air between them felt thick, the silence almost suffocating. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was being tested, but she had no idea how to play the game. Her mind was racing, a million questions swirling in her head. Why was she here? What did he want with her? The more she tried to reason with herself, the more she realized that nothing made sense. She was in a strange place with a man who had the power to control everything around her, and she was completely powerless. You're not going anywhere, Victor said again, his voice calm but insistent, as though he had read her thoughts. But I didn't ask for this, Jessica replied, her voice shaking. She couldn't help it. Fear was creeping in, and it was hard to keep it hidden. You don't need to ask, Victor said, leaning back in his chair with a slight smile. You're here now, and that's all that matters. We can make this work, but you need to understand something. My world is not like the one you're used to, and I won't allow anyone to disrupt it. Jessica swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. His world? What did that even mean? What do you expect from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your cooperation, Victor replied simply. Nothing more, nothing less. Just stay here, follow my rules, and you'll be fine. His eyes softened slightly, but the intensity remained. And I will take care of you. Jessica wanted to argue, to stand up and demand to leave, but there was something about Victor's presence, something about the way he spoke, that made it feel pointless. The fear, the uncertainty, it all seemed so overwhelming. And yet, there was a strange pull in her chest. She hated it, but she couldn't ignore it. I don't belong here, Jessica said, almost to herself. Victor's expression shifted, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. Compassion? Or maybe just an understanding that she was far from where she wanted to be. We all end up where we're meant to be, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You don't have to like it, but you will learn to accept it. And in time, you'll see that it's not so bad. Jessica shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. She had a life, a son, a future, none of which had anything to do with Victor and his world. I can't stay here forever, she said, though there was a tinge of uncertainty in her voice. You'll be fine, Victor said. You'll adapt. His words were oddly reassuring, but the unease inside Jessica only grew. She didn't want to adapt. She didn't want any of this. She wanted to go back to her life, back to the hospital, to her son, and forget all about this strange man and his dangerous world. But as much as she wanted to fight it, a part of her knew that wouldn't happen. She was in too deep now. She had stepped into a world she didn't understand, and the only way out might be through him. I'm not your prisoner, Jessica said, trying to stand her ground. No, Victor replied, standing up and walking slowly toward her. You're not my prisoner. You're my guest, and I expect you to behave accordingly. He stopped just in front of her, his presence looming over her, and for a brief moment, Jessica felt like she was being drawn into something far bigger than herself. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. She felt like she had been caught in a web, and no matter how hard she tried to break free, she couldn't. You're not going anywhere, Victor repeated softly, his eyes locking onto hers. Not until I say so. His words hung in the air, and Jessica realized that for the first time, she had no control. She had walked into this room, and now she was trapped in his world. She had no idea how to get out, but one thing was clear. She wasn't leaving anytime soon. Jessica sat still on the bed, her mind racing as Victor's words echoed in her head. She wasn't his prisoner. She wasn't his guest either, despite what he had said. She was just a woman caught in the middle of a situation she couldn't control. She wanted to leave, to run, but the door was locked. The men who had been watching her since she arrived stood just outside, silent and unyielding. She could feel their eyes on her, even from across the room. Victor wasn't just another man. He was someone who commanded attention without saying a word. She tried to steady her breathing, but the reality of her situation hit her all over again. Her son, Ben, was still at the hospital. She had no idea where he was or who was watching over him. Her heart clenched at the thought of him being alone. I need to go back, she said softly, her voice barely audible. Victor, who had been sitting across from her, watching her every move, finally spoke. You'll see him when I say you will, he replied, his voice calm but firm. Jessica's pulse quickened, and her hands gripped the edge of the bed, her nails digging into the fabric. You don't get to control me, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. I don't need to control you, Victor said, his gaze unflinching. I'm just giving you what you need. Safety. Protection. All you have to do is stay quiet, follow the rules, and I'll handle the rest. Jessica's throat tightened, and she swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. I don't need your protection, she snapped, standing up from the bed. She felt dizzy, the walls closing in on her as she moved to the door. You don't know what you need, Victor said, his voice colder now. He stood up too, slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. He was taller than her, his presence commanding. You're in my world now, Jessica. And in my world, no one leaves until I say so. Jessica backed away from him, her eyes darting to the door, desperate to find a way out. Please, just let me go, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Victor didn't move at first, watching her with that same unreadable expression. Then, after a long pause, he took a step forward, closing the distance between them. You'll be fine, he said, his tone soft but firm. You don't need to go anywhere. I'm here to take care of you. You don't have to like it, but you'll accept it. It's the only way this works. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine as he reached out, his hand brushing against her shoulder. It wasn't a threatening gesture, but it felt like a silent command. She jerked away from him, her heart racing, but Victor just watched her, unmoved. I don't want this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know, Victor replied, his voice surprisingly gentle. But sometimes we don't get what we want. We get what we need. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Jessica didn't know how to respond. She had no idea what to do or say. She just wanted to leave, to escape from this nightmare. But something about Victor kept her rooted in place. There was no way out. No way to escape his world. She was trapped, and for the first time since this all started, she truly felt it. Victor took another step toward her, his presence overwhelming. "You'll stay with me, Jessica. For as long as it takes," he said, his voice low and steady. "And you'll see. In time, you'll understand why you have no choice but to stay." The words felt like chains, wrapping around her chest, and no matter how hard she tried to break free, she knew deep down that there was nothing she could do. She was his now, whether she liked it or not. And there was no going back. Jessica sat in the room, the weight of Victor's words hanging heavily in the air. She had no idea what was happening or how she ended up here, but the longer she stayed, the more she realized there was no easy way out. Her thoughts kept drifting back to her son, Ben. She needed to see him. But every time she tried to focus on that, the pull of Victor's presence took over her mind. She glanced around the room again, taking in the luxurious decor, the heavy curtains, the ornate furniture, the deep mahogany wood that lined the walls. It wasn't a hospital room. It was more like a private suite, an office, something much more personal, much more dangerous. Victor had made it clear. She wasn't leaving. Not until he allowed it. Her pulse raced as she looked back at the door, wondering if she could somehow escape without being noticed. But the men outside would be waiting. She knew it. And the thought of confronting them, Victor's guards, terrified her. She didn't stand a chance. As much as she wanted to fight, as much as she wanted to push back against this reality, she knew she was trapped. "You're looking for an escape." Victor's voice cut through her thoughts, smooth and steady as ever. She jumped slightly, not having heard him approach. "It's a wasted effort," he continued, his dark eyes fixed on her. "There's nowhere for you to go." Jessica's throat tightened. She wasn't going to cry. She wouldn't. But the fear still clawed at her insides. "I need to see my son," she said, her voice trembling. "I won't stop until I do." Victor didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to be moved by her desperation. "You'll see him when I decide it's time," he replied, his tone calm, unwavering. "For now, you need to trust me." Jessica's chest tightened, and for a moment, she almost lost control. The idea of being forced to stay here, to obey his orders, was unbearable. "Trust you," she repeated, her voice strained with disbelief. "How am I supposed to trust someone like you?" Victor didn't respond right away. He simply stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Because I'm the only one who can protect you," he said softly, almost like a warning. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You think you can leave, but you have no idea what's waiting out there. You need me, whether you want to admit it or not." His words hit harder than she expected. She tried to push them away, but they lingered, settling in her mind. "I don't need you," Jessica whispered, more to herself than to him. But Victor was already shaking his head, a small, almost pitying smile on his lips. "You don't understand yet. But you will." He turned away from her then, his gaze still steady, confident. "I'm giving you time to adjust, Jessica. Time to think." She felt a pang of panic, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I'll be back later," he said, his tone final. "Stay here. I'll have someone bring you food. Rest. You'll need it." He walked toward the door, and Jessica felt a strange mix of emotions, frustration, anger, fear. He was right about one thing. She was stuck here, and there was nothing she could do. She had no choice but to comply. He paused at the door and turned back to her, his eyes catching hers one last time. "Don't try anything stupid," he said, his voice low and warning. "I'm watching you." As the door closed behind him, Jessica was left alone with her thoughts. She had to find a way out. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait for an opportunity, wait for him to slip up, and hope that when the time came, she would be ready. Ready to escape from this man's world and return to the life she knew. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that easy. Nothing about this was ever going to be easy. Jessica sat in the room, the silence around her feeling suffocating. She had tried to push her thoughts away, to ignore the growing dread that had been creeping into her mind since Victor left. But now, alone in the room, the reality of her situation settled in. She was trapped. Her mind raced, replaying every moment of the last few hours. How did she get here? Why did Victor take such an interest in her? She could feel the weight of his eyes on her even when he wasn't around. The fact that he had been watching her so closely was unsettling. But there was something else, something deeper. He wasn't just a powerful man. He had something else. A presence. An ability to make people bend to his will without lifting a finger. She had felt it the moment she met him. It was like he owned every room he walked into. And now, it was as if she, too, was part of that room, part of his world, even though she had no say in it. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The night was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She had been here for hours, and it felt like time was standing still. She wanted to leave. She wanted to escape. But she knew, deep down, that running wasn't an option. Victor's words kept echoing in her mind. "You're not going anywhere until I say so." His voice was so calm, so controlled, and yet there was something in it that sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't get away from the fact that she was at his mercy. But as much as she hated it, there was something about him that kept drawing her in. Something about the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to know exactly what to say. It was impossible to ignore. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Jessica jumped, her heart racing. She hadn't heard anyone approach. The door opened slowly, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. He was one of Victor's men, she assumed. "Mr. Moretti asked me to bring you something," the man said, his voice low and even. Jessica didn't know what to say. She was too tired, too overwhelmed to think straight. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice shaky. The man set a tray down on the table beside her. It was a simple meal, bread, cheese, and a glass of water. Nothing extravagant, but it felt like an offering, something to placate her, to make her feel like she wasn't entirely helpless. The man nodded and left the room without another word. Jessica stared at the tray, her stomach growling. She hadn't eaten much today, but the idea of eating here, in this place, made her stomach turn. Still, she knew she had to. She couldn't survive on fear alone. As she ate, her mind wandered again to Victor. She couldn't deny that she was drawn to him, even if she hated it. There was something magnetic about him. He wasn't just some criminal, some dangerous man with power. There was more to him than that. She could feel it. And yet, the more she tried to understand, the more she realized she couldn't. His world was so far removed from hers. It wasn't just the money, the luxury. It was the way he carried himself, the confidence, the certainty. It was as if nothing could touch him. But Jessica couldn't let herself get lost in that world. She had to focus on getting out, on getting back to her son. But as the night wore on, and the silence of the room wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, she realized just how trapped she was. There was no easy way out, no clear path forward. And in the midst of her fear, there was also a strange sense of resignation. She was in his world now, whether she liked it or not. And as much as she tried to fight it, something deep inside her knew that there was no escaping it. Not yet, at least. Jessica sat in the room, her hands trembling slightly as she set the empty plate down on the table. She had eaten in silence, not because she wanted to, but because there was nothing else to do. The food was simple, but it was the first real meal she'd had since being thrown into this strange, suffocating world. Her mind kept returning to her son, Ben. She could still hear his voice in her head, asking her when she would come home. The thought of him alone in that hospital made her chest tighten with fear. She had to see him. She had to find a way out of here. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized there was no clear path. The door was locked. The guards outside were ever present. And Victor was always watching. She could feel his presence, even when he wasn't physically in the room with her. She didn't know how he did it, but he always seemed to know what she was thinking. His words from earlier echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you'll see him when I decide it's time. Asterisk, it wasn't fair. She was a mother, and nothing in the world was more important to her than her son. But here she was, stuck in this lavish room, with no control over her life. And the more she resisted, the more she realized how powerless she was in this situation. There was no way out. Not yet. She could feel the walls closing in around her, and the isolation was starting to take its toll. The quiet was deafening. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the space, and it was as though time had come to a complete standstill. Jessica wanted to scream, to break something, to do anything to release the tension that had built up in her chest. But she couldn't. She wouldn't give Victor the satisfaction of seeing her break. She stood up from the bed, pacing the room as her thoughts spiraled. She had to find a way to get to Ben. She couldn't be stuck here forever. She had to be strong for him. But as she moved around the room, her eyes landed on the small window in the corner. It was high up, too high to reach, but the idea of getting out, of running away, felt like a lifeline. If she could just get to the window, maybe there was a chance. Maybe she could escape. But as quickly as the thought came, it faded. She knew better. This wasn't a simple escape. She wasn't dealing with an ordinary person. Victor had power. He controlled everything around him. And no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she couldn't escape that truth. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the room. She was talking to no one in particular, just voicing the question that had been haunting her since she walked into that hospital room. She had no answers, only uncertainty. The sound of the door opening broke the silence. Jessica's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see Victor standing in the doorway, his eyes locked on her with that same cold, calculated look. He stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind him. "How are we doing?" he asked, his voice smooth and almost too calm. Jessica swallowed hard, trying to gather her thoughts. "I need to see my son," she said again, her voice more forceful this time. "You will," Victor replied, his gaze unwavering. "But only when you've earned that right." Jessica clenched her fists at her sides, frustration bubbling up inside her. "Earn it? What do you mean by that?" she demanded. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked further into the room, his presence filling every corner. "You think you have control here, Jessica," he said, his voice low. "But you don't. I'm in charge, and you will do things my way." The way he said it, the confidence in his tone, made it clear that he wasn't asking. He was telling her. "You don't understand," Jessica said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not like you. I can't just follow you." Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "You will follow me. You don't have a choice. You're already too far in." Jessica's chest tightened as his words sank in. She had no choice. She was stuck in this world, and there was nothing she could do to change that. Her thoughts shifted to Ben again. She had to get out of here. She had to find a way to break free from Victor's grip. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be easy. And she knew Victor wasn't going to let her go without a fight. Victor stood in the doorway, his gaze never leaving Jessica as she struggled to maintain her composure. The weight of his words still hung in the air, his calm, controlled presence seeming to grow with each passing second. Jessica's chest tightened, her body stiffening as she realized how powerless she was in this moment. She had no control over her situation, no control over the people in this room, or the life she was now forced to live. She couldn't stop herself from asking, "Why are you doing this to me?" Her voice, though shaky, was still defiant, despite the fear that had been building inside her. Victor's eyes softened for just a moment, but there was still an edge of authority in his voice when he spoke. "I'm not doing anything to you, Jessica," he said, his voice calm, but still carrying a weight that made her feel small. "I'm doing what's necessary. For your protection." Jessica shook her head, frustration rising in her chest. "Protection? This isn't protection. This is kidnapping." Victor's lips curled into a slight smile, but it was not a reassuring one. "You're not a prisoner here, Jessica. You're free to leave whenever you want," he said, though his words didn't match the reality of her situation. She wasn't free to leave. She was stuck here, in a room with no way out, surrounded by men who worked for him, who followed his every command. "Then why won't you let me go? Why can't I see my son?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. Victor sighed, as if the question was one he had been expecting. "You'll see your son when it's safe," he said, his voice still calm, but there was an undeniable firmness in it. "And right now, staying here is the only place that's safe for you." Jessica felt the anger welling up again, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. "Safe?" she repeated. "From what? What's going on, Victor? I don't understand any of this. You won't tell me anything. You keep me locked away like a prisoner." Victor's gaze grew more intense, and Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm doing this to protect you from people who would hurt you," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "People who would use you for their own gain. I'm protecting you from that world, Jessica, and I won't let you go back to it." His words were like a puzzle that Jessica couldn't piece together. She couldn't understand why she was here, why he was doing this to her. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like there was more to the story than he was telling. Jessica looked away, her mind racing. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't just accept this. She needed to see Ben. She needed to hold him, to make sure he was okay. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Victor stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice low and steady. "You don't understand now, but you will. In time, you'll see why I'm doing this." Jessica clenched her fists at her sides, fighting the urge to scream, to lash out at him. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not now. She had to keep herself together. "For Ben. I want to go home," she said, the words feeling heavy in her throat. Victor didn't respond right away. Instead, he simply studied her, his gaze softening for just a moment before he spoke again. "This is your home now, Jessica," he said, his voice calm but final. "This is where you belong. And when you understand that, everything else will fall into place." Jessica felt a knot form in her stomach as his words sank in. This was her reality now, whether she liked it or not. She had no choice. She had to stay. She had to wait. And somehow, she had to figure out how to navigate this strange, terrifying world that Victor had pulled her into. The door clicked behind him as he left the room, and Jessica was left alone again, her thoughts spinning. She was stuck in this place, trapped in this life. And the more she tried to push it away, the more she realized that there was no escaping it. Not yet. Not until Victor decided it was time. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. Victor's words still echoed in Jessica's mind long after he left the room. This was her home now. She felt a cold shiver run through her as she paced the room, trying to make sense of everything. There was no escaping, no easy way out. Every plan she had, every hope, seemed impossible now. The walls felt like they were closing in on her. She had to find a way out, but she couldn't see how. She couldn't even leave the room. The feeling of helplessness washed over her again, and she squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the tears. What had happened to her life? What had happened to her son? The thought of Ben made her chest ache. She needed to see him. She needed to make sure he was okay. But Victor wouldn't let her. Not yet. And the more she tried to fight it, the more she realized how trapped she really was. She had no control. Not anymore. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and now she was living in a reality where everything was determined by Victor. And as much as she hated it, she couldn't deny the pull he had on her. He wasn't just a dangerous man. He was someone who had the power to change everything with a single word. It was terrifying, and yet, there was something undeniable about him. Something that made her second-guess herself, something that made her question everything she thought she knew. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of the door opening. She turned quickly to see a man in a black suit entering the room. He wasn't one of the guards, but he looked just as imposing. "Mr. Moretti sent me," he said with a slight nod. "He wants to make sure you're comfortable." Jessica didn't trust him. She didn't trust any of them. But she was too exhausted to fight. She didn't want to argue, didn't want to make things worse. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded and placed a small envelope on the table before turning to leave. As soon as he was gone, Jessica walked over to the table, her curiosity getting the better of her. She opened the envelope to find a small note inside. It was handwritten in neat, elegant script. Asterisk, "You will see your son soon. Patience is key. Trust me." Asterisk, the word sent a chill down her spine. Trust him? How could she trust someone like Victor? How could she trust someone who controlled every aspect of her life without hesitation? She threw the note back in the envelope, her hands shaking with frustration. She didn't want to play his games. She didn't want to be here. She wanted to go home. The sound of footsteps outside the room caught her attention, and she quickly turned to face the door. But when it opened, it wasn't Victor who walked in. It was one of the guards. He stepped into the room with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Moretti asked that you stay in your room for now," he said. "He'll be back shortly to speak with you." Jessica stared at him, her mind racing. She had no idea when Victor would return, but she wasn't sure she could handle another conversation with him. Every time they spoke, she felt more and more like a puppet on strings, being controlled by someone who didn't care about her, only about his own agenda. "I need to see my son," she said, her voice firm this time. though there was a tremor she couldn't hide. The guard didn't respond right away. He just stood there, silently watching her. Finally, he spoke. "I've been told to inform you that you'll see him soon. Mr. Moretti has made arrangements." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Soon? How soon? She couldn't wait anymore. Her son needed her. "I don't believe you," she said, stepping closer to him. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" The guard's expression didn't change, but he looked at her for a moment longer before turning to leave. "Mr. Moretti will speak with you soon," he said simply before closing the door behind him. Jessica's hands clenched into fists as she turned away, pacing the room again. The uncertainty, the waiting, it was driving her mad. How much longer could she endure this? How much longer would she be trapped in this place, in this world, where she had no say? She couldn't keep waiting. She couldn't keep sitting here, hoping that Victor would show her some mercy. The door creaked open again, and this time, it was Victor who entered. His eyes locked on hers the moment he stepped inside. Jessica felt a wave of mixed emotions flood over her. Anger, frustration, fear. But there was something else too. A strange, unsettling attraction that she hated herself for feeling. She quickly shook it off, reminding herself that she couldn't trust him. "You're still here," Victor said, his voice calm and almost amused. "I told you, you would see him soon." Jessica's heart raced. "Soon isn't good enough," she said, her voice barely controlled. "I need to see him now." Victor took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You'll see him," he said softly, his tone more reassuring than she expected. "But you have to understand, Jessica. You're here for a reason. You're part of this world now, and you will learn to accept it." She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She had no choice. She had to play along, at least for now. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. And for a brief moment, she wondered if there would ever be a way out of this twisted reality.